Hello and welcome, my lovely psychology students. It is great to have you back for another session. This session, as you can see on the screen, is on memory, and we're looking at our first theoretical model. Now, remember, if we link back to approaches, in the cognitive approach, it states that it uses computer and theoretical models. Well, the multi-store model of memory is an example of a theoretical model. And with this one, key names, Atkinson and Shiffrin. These names are important, so it is really, really, really important. I seem to be saying important quite a lot here, that you know these two names. So let's get a start. First of all, let's understand what is a model. Now, we're not looking or thinking about the one that's walking down the catwalk showing off some clothes. This is a visual representation of memory. Memory is very hard to understand because it can be regarded as an abstract concept. We can't physically see it. So by creating a theoretical model, it gives us this visual representation of how memory is structured. So it helps us understand, in the case of the multi-store model of memory, it helps us understand how memory is structured, the different components, and the processes within them. So really, it's telling us what it looks like. So let's start with the multi-store model of memory. We're going to just start with some of its key features. And these key features are very important because if you're given a written AO1 on the multi-store model, so you're giving a description of the multi-store model of memories, these are the key features that you will need to include in them. Atkinson and Shiffrin, it's always good to know their names. They developed the first ever model of memory. So it was the first ever model. Now, pausing it here on the AO1, this actually can be turned into a good AO3. And the fact that because it was the first ever model of memory that was created, it has allowed other cognitive researchers to develop it further, to challenge it, to really scrutinize it, and actually develop a better understanding of all the different components or stores of memory. So actually you could turn that into a bit of an AO3 that is a strength of this model, even though these other theorists critique in a negative way and say, well, these are the weaknesses or this is what it doesn't do. It allowed these researchers that opportunity to do so. Now, the multi-store model of memory comprises of 3 memory stores. The sensory register, please note, it can also be known as the sensory memory. Both would be acceptable. The short-term memory and the long-term memory. Now, remember, the sensory register is a memory store that we're actually unconsciously unaware of what's going in there. Now, if you looked at the different characteristics of capacity, duration, and encoding, you would be able to see the differences in all these memory stores. Remember, the short-term memory is a temporary store in the sense that it's not a permanent storage place, and it deals with the present. We're in the here and the now, whereas the long-term memory is a permanent memory storage store. So that's where we can store things and they will permanently stay. So there is a little bit more about it, but that's just giving you that little bit of a recap of what we've looked on them. Now, the multi-store model of memory is a structural model. Now, a structural model means that there is a certain structure to it. Now, I always say to you guys, don't describe it with the word it's in the sentence. Try and explain it that little bit more. So that means the model is set out in a certain way, and it has to be set out that way. We can't move the different components, the different memory stores, the different processes about. It has to follow that certain structure. It's also been regarded as a linear model. We actually say it's a structural linear model. Now, linear means line. And in this case, with the multi-store model of memory, this is when, or what it states, that memory travels kind of like in a straight line. You can't jump sections. You've got to go through the structure in the right order, so it follows a linear. It goes in like a straight line. So we can't miss out a component, so that means we kind of do a jump. So that means it breaks the straight line. So it's a linear process. And that's why it links to structure. It has to go from sensory register, short-term memory, and then it may move into the long-term memory, and then it can, from the long-term memory, go back into the short-term memory. It cannot go, according to the multi-store model of memory, from the sensory register, big jump, into the long-term memory. Nope, because that's not a linear, it's not a straight line, it's not flowing in that straight structural line. It also highlights that there are key processes in the multi-store model of memory, and these key processes are attention and rehearsal. So these processes are things that we physically have to do. So we physically have to pay attention to information so that we can start to use it. And also, in order for us to keep hold of that information, we need to go through a process of rehearsal. And when we look at the model, you can see where these apply as the key processes within the model. It also states that the short-term and the long-term memory are unitary stores. Now let's understand what we mean by unitary stores. Think maths, unit, tens, hundreds. Unit means one. So if it's a unitary store, it states that each store only really does one thing. So for example, the short-term memory's function, that unitary function, is rehearsal. That's all it does, according to the multi-store model of memory. And the long-term memory is storage. It only stores information, that's all. So it's quite a simplistic, there's another little bit of an AO3. It can be argued that the multi-store model of memory could be seen as quite a simplistic explanation of the short-term and the long-term memory. And when we look at other sections, for example, the working memory model, the different types of long-term memory, we can use that as evidence, as highlighting why these can just be regarded as simplistic explanations. But remember, that's AO3. But back to this. So short-term and long-term memory are unitary stores. They only carry out one function. And as you know, because by now in the memory module, you would have covered the key characteristics: capacity, coding. Remember, coding can also be known as encoding. Remember, I like to give you the alternative words so that you could become familiar, because you never know. They could come up one or the other in an exam question. And finally, duration. Now, it acknowledges that each store is different on these components. And actually, we've got a lot of supporting evidence from what we've done, for example, capacity in the short-term memory, the long-term memory, and the sensory register. We've got evidence to back all of that up. So that empirical data that we looked at actually gives support that they are definitely 3 different memory stores. Some more AO3, and we haven't even got there yet. Oh, wow, we're on a ball here, right? So we've got all that empirical support to back up that there are 3 different memory stores because they differ in these 3 sections. So here I've highlighted the key features of the multi-store model of memory. So let's have a look at this model. Now remember, you must be able to draw this model, you must be able to label this model, you must be able to give a written description of this model, because you could get the word label in the exam question as your command word, or draw, or explain, outline, describe. So it is very important that you can do that. So let's make a wee start. Right, we have all our arrows coming in, and these arrows represent what is called sensory input. Now, sensory input is all the information from all our senses that's within our environment goes into our sensory register. Now, the sensory register or the sensory store is a store that we're actually completely unaware of what's happening in there. That's why we say it's like an unconscious memory store, because we're unaware of what happens there. But everything, our senses, smell, taste, touch, sight, hearing, all that information goes into the sensory store. Now, it doesn't stay in there very long, because remember we looked at the study of Sperling, and we can use that for capacity and duration. And we did learn that, it's got a very large capacity, but a very short duration. And if we don't do this next process, in order for some of that information to then move on in this linear structural model, then the information is going to be forgotten. But in the sensory register, we have different modalities. Modalities different because it comes from our different senses. It deals with technically a lot of different types of coding. One example is echoic, echo, sound. Iconic, what am I like? Iconic, that is visual. So here we can see that in the sensory register, it does deal with a lot of different types or formats. Remember, that's what coding is. It's the format in which that memory store will process the information. So all of that goes into our sensory register. Now, I'm going to get you to do now that will make you realize and make you take it from your sensory register into your short-term memory. Now, I've done this in class. Now, put your arms, and hopefully you're wearing a long sleeve top. If not, maybe wiggle your middle. And I would just like you to shake your arms or wiggle your middle and feel the cloth against your skin. Can you all do that? Now, what's happening is that I've drawn your attention to that information that was already in your sensory register. And because it's drawn your attention, it's then been processed. Maybe that's one of our key processes of paying attention. It's now moved into your short-term memory. Now, in order for things to stay in the short-term memory, and we've learned that through looking at duration with Peterson and Peterson, because they said information has a very short, the findings said 18 seconds if rehearsal doesn't count. So in order for this information to stay in our short-term memory, it needs to enter what is referred to as the rehearsal loop. Rehearsal loop, rehearsal loop, rehearsal loop. Right, okay, enough. I'm just keeping on. It's gone into that circular thing. It keeps going over and over and over and over and over. Okay, enough. I'm sure you get the point. Because in that rehearsal loop, it allows for maintenance rehearsal to occur. We've got to maintain that. So if I gave you a number 012267284141, what are you going to do now? You're going to be going 012267284141, 012267284141, 012267284141, right? That will go into your rehearsal loop. So it's going over and over to maintain that information in your short-term memory. Now, according to the multi-store model of memory, in order, because remember, rehearsal is our other process, in order for that information to travel into the long-term memory, because remember, this is a linear structural model, so it has to follow this specific format, this specific structure in a straight line. And that means we need to have what's called prolonged rehearsal. So that means that information has to be rehearsed for a prolonged period of time to give it any chance for then moving into our long-term memory. Now, our long-term memory is designed, according to the multi-store model of memory, as a storage. So that's where it becomes permanent, because remember, the long-term memory is a permanent memory store. And the information is stored there, but only if we've done prolonged rehearsal. But we can access that information so that we can remember things. It's like, can you remember what birthday cake you had last year on your birthday? Because what you're busy doing now is that you kind of sent that message to the long-term memory, but remember, you can't work in the long-term memory, because what does it have to do then? It has to be retrieved and sent back to the short-term memory. So you might have said you got Benjamin or Benny, or I don't know what the caterpillar cake's called that you can get in all the supermarkets. That's what you might have got for your birthday. So you've retrieved that information, you've sent it out of storage back into the short-term memory. It goes into the rehearsal loop because we're thinking of the caterpillar cake. I'm getting a bit hungry here. Okay, we're thinking about the caterpillar cake. It's gone back into the rehearsal, and when we no longer need it, it gets then put back into the long-term memory. So this was our first ever model of memory. It was pretty amazing because nobody had ever visually seen the structure and the process on how our memory works. And that's the great thing about a theoretical model. We can take that theory and we can create a visual representation of what memory looks like. Now, what you need to do on this is practice. Can you draw this model? Can you label this model? It is really, really important. Quick exam question. Jamie wanted to contact his doctor. He looked up the number in his telephone directory. Before he dialed the number, he had a short conversation with his friend. Jamie was about to phone his doctor, but he had forgotten the number. Use your knowledge of the multi-store model of memory to explain why Jamie would not remember the doctor's number. 4 marks. Okay, let's just do a little bit of exam skills here. No, it's a 4-marker. And you're asked to explain why. So you've got one key command word. So you're asked to do one thing. So 4 marks, it's going to be on a grade boundary. I know my students, you've got those generic grade boundaries that I've given you. Become familiar. You know, what gets you 1 to 2 marks, what gets you 3 to 4 marks. Really important to become familiar with those. So you're using your knowledge to explain why Jamie could not remember. So what assessment objective this one is? Yes, you're using your AO1 knowledge, but you're applying it to explain Jamie's behavior. So this is going to be an AO2 question. Okay, let's understand a little bit more. What's our topic area? It's your knowledge of the multi-store model of memory. And we've got to be able to explain why Jamie's not remembering it. Okay, we're explaining why. So again, explain, that's going to be in some detail. Explain, it's going to be in full sentences. We're going to be using relevant terminology, but we're taking that AO1 knowledge to explain why Jamie forgot about it. So what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to pause the video and go practice answering the question. Over to you. Come on, pause. You know when you want to give it a go. The more you practice, the better you become. Okay, I'll be quiet now. Have a pause. Right, great. I am glad you paused. Well, I really hope you have. So let's compare your answer to my answer. So according to the multi-store model of memory, rehearsal is needed to keep information in the short-term memory. And that is, if you don't keep rehearsing, we forget that information. Due to Jamie's conversation with his friend, it will prevent him from rehearsing the phone number, which will lead him to forgetting it. So because he is then focusing on something new and he's not rehearsing it, it's going to cause him to forget it. Because remember, if we don't rehearse it, it's not going to stay in there very long. as well as Jamie will have received new information from the conversation. As the short-term memory has a limited capacity, this new information would have pushed out the older, unrehearsed telephone number, which would have led him to forget it. We know the short-term memory has a limited duration, and you could have added that in that as well, but you can't put everything in for 4 marks. So we've gone here, lack of rehearsing. Because he's had this conversation, new information's come in. We know that the short-term memory has a limited capacity. And because he's not rehearsing it, that new information is going to push the old information out, and it will lead to him forgetting. So compare your answer to this one. Again, it's important to use the relevant terminology. I've highlighted that in red. I've used some of the AO1, but majority of my answers AO2. All I've put here, according to the multi-store model of memory, rehearsal is needed to keep information in the short-term memory, taking that point, and we've applied it to Jamie. Short-term memory has a limited capacity, again, showing that, but then we're applying it, we're explaining why then Jamie forgot the telephone number. Right, good stuff. Let's do a little bit of AO3 peels now. It's about quality rather than quantity. Point, make your point that's clear and precise. Explain what your point means. Evidence, give a piece of supporting evidence or example. Elaborate, explain why the evidence supports the point. Evaluate, can we bring in another piece of evidence to further support it, or do we have something that challenges it? And link, a mini conclusion that ties it all together. It's not repeating the point, it's making that mini conclusion that ties it all together. And that's what the PEEL stands for. Point, explain, evidence, elaborate, evaluate, link. Now, little task. I have the makings of a PEEL here. There's a point, there's an explain. Remember, point, clear and precise. Explain what the point means. Evidence, a piece of evidence to back up your point. Elaborate, explain why the evidence backs up your point. Evaluate, do we have something that further supports, so another piece of evidence? Do we have something that challenges your point? And link, it's that little mini conclusion that ties it all together. I'd like you to read through these, understand what you're reading, think about the use of the words, and I would like you to put them in the right order of the PEEL. Over to you, so let's pause. Come on, don't just wait for me to get to the next slide. Pause. The more you interact with peeling, the better you become, because remember, it's a skill that you need to practice. Pause now. Right, good stuff, my lovelies. I am glad to hear that you have paused. So hopefully you've taken the time to work out which one goes where, and let us check. So point, a key strength. Nice, we're saying a key strength. So we're signposting to the examiner, hold on, this is a strength. We're making the point clear and precise. A key strength of the multi-store model of memory is that there is a large amount of empirical support for each memory store. Clear and precise. Now explain what the point means. Research shows that there are key differences for each store in relationship to capacity, coding, and duration. Okay, so we're explaining that there is a large amount of empirical support. So what's the empirical support doing? It's showing that there are key differences between each stores. So we're explaining that there's a lot of evidence that supports the 3 different stores. Now we want some evidence. Research findings shows that the capacity of the short-term memory is between 5 to 9 pieces of information, whereas the long-term memory has an unlimited capacity. So we're not describing the study, we're just taking that part of the findings to show the difference. This evidence is clearly showing that there's differences between each store, so therefore supporting each store. So now we need to elaborate. This does support that these two stores are separate and independent. What have I done? I've explained what this research is telling us in relationship to the point. Now we want an evaluate. An evaluate a number of things that we could use, but we're just focusing on at the moment, do we have something that further supports what we're saying, or do we have something that argues against it? And here we have additional research shows that coding is different in each store. Badly found that the short-term memory uses acoustic and the long-term memory uses semantic encoding. So we're using another piece of research to support that there are key differences, which in turn then supports that there's two separate stores. Link a mini conclusion, not repeating the point, thereby increasing the overall validity of this module due to its research support. So we're making a nice little conclusion. Okay, let's try it once more. We have it all muddled up. Find the peel. Pause now. Fantastic. I am glad you paused and we're back again. Now, let's see whether you managed to get this peel in order. Point. It has been argued that the short-term memory in the multi-store model of memory is not a unitary store, meaning that there is more than one type of short-term memory store. Okay, so we've made our point. It has been argued, right? Because remember, it's not a strength or it's not a limitation of the multi-store model of memory, because that's what the multi-store model of memory says. But there are people psychologists that argue against what it says. So it's about phrasing your point, because not everything needs to be put down as strengths and limitations. You want to create a discussion within your AO3. So it has been argued that the short-term memory and the multi-store memory is not a unitary store, meaning that there is more than one type of short-term memory store. The case study of KF, who suffered from amnesia, found that when digits were read out to him, his recall was poor. However, when he was able to read the digits himself, recall was much better. So we've got the evidence, now elaborate. This clearly shows, again, it's signposting by saying this clearly shows, so you're elaborating, you're explaining why the evidence supports your point. So don't forget to signpost when you're writing your appeals, and that helps link everything together. This clearly shows that there must be at least two short-term memory stores to process the different types of information, sound and visual. So the elaboration has clearly explained what the evidence was telling us. Now evaluate. Again, we're bringing in some more evidence to support what we're saying. Further research has shown that using KF and other amnesiacs is that there is another short-term memory that processes non-verbal sounds. So here we can now say, hold on, this short-term memory is actually, it does more than just rehearsal. It's dealing with a lot of different types of information, not just rehearsing on an acoustic level. Great, so we can understand why it's challenging. So last little bit, we want to bring in that link. Remember, it's a mini conclusion that ties it all together. You're not just repeating your point. This clearly challenges the simplicity of the short-term memory as stated by the multi-store model of memory. Peeling. Peeling is about bringing depth, because remember, AO3 is not just evaluate. AO3 also stands for interpretation and analysis. So by bringing depth into your AO3s, you're incorporating interpretation and analysis. And that's what the examiner is looking for. Ooh, if I was an examiner getting good peels like this, I'll be doing cartwheels. Now, there are a good few more evaluations or AO3s that you can bring in. So it's over to you. How well can you do this? So another evaluation, there is more than one type of rehearsal. Because remember, the multi-store model of memory states that we just have to do maintenance rehearsal for a prolonged period of time, then it goes into the long-term memory. But actually, it's been argued that it's elaborate rehearsal that can also get it into the long-term memory. So we've got a nice evaluation there. Have a read of it in the textbook. Think of your peel structure and write up your peel. Another one, there is more than one type of long-term memory. Now, once we've done long-term memory, this one will be much easier to do, right? So you can always come back to this one once you've done long-term memory, because remember, according to the multi-store model of memory, it states that the long-term memory is a unitary store. It's one storage system, just like one big lockup. But according to Tolving, there's more than one type of long-term memory store. So we can use that as challenging information. So practice your appeal. And remember, if you're my student, take the time, send me an email if you've got any questions, pop in and see me, and I will be there to answer your questions. Take good care, my lovelies.